Schelling's philosophy as a precursor to his philosophy. Well, as a result of that, Schelling, his good friend, got very upset with him, kind of broke up with him. Hegel tried to keep the friendship going, but Schelling was pretty pissed off, right? So even at the end of Hegel's life, they still hadn't resolved that friendship back again. And then Hegel died, and Schelling went on to live long enough that he replaced Hegel in Berlin. So Schelling is teaching philosophy, and Kierkegaard is one of his students. And it's not like they know one another very well, because this is probably like 200 people in a big auditorium, and Kierkegaard is in that class. And by the way, another young man named Karl Marx is in that same class. So that should be interesting, more interesting than people even mention it, especially because both Karl Marx and Kierkegaard are going to revolt against Hegel. And there's kind of a really interesting clue to why this happens, because Schelling is still mad at what Hegel said, and so he's the one that teaches Hegel, as if Hegel's philosophy is kind of a precursor to his philosophy. And both Kierkegaard and Marx are repulsed by the depiction of Hegel's philosophy that Schelling gives them. In other words, that's exactly what Schelling wanted. He wanted people to be mad at Hegel because he was mad at Hegel, right? So both of them revolt against Hegel. Now, if you remember, Hegel talks about this dynamic between spirit, you know, the en soi, the pour soi in French, the en sich, the für sich in German, the in itself and the for itself in English, right? And what is it? It's, you know, my subjective side thinking about myself as my object of who I am, right? And this creates this dynamic in my mind. Do I want the candy bar or not? Do I want to get married or not? You know, Faust, if you think of Faust, you know, what's the whole point of life? He's furious, really, with how he's wasted his life. I bet I won't be able to find this. That's probably not going to work, but
are those Legos?
They could be. People do weird things. I'm not going to find it, but if maybe I'll find the link and I'll send it to you. Oh, my computer cooperates with me. This one wanted me to log in to YouTube for some reason today. So it's like, what? Why? But I mean, Faust, you know, the play starts, Goethe's version of it, with Faust sitting in his study, and he's all upset because he's spent his whole life being an academic, and now he feels like he's got nothing to show for it. And he's not had a fun life, an aesthetic life. Instead, he's just kind of pissed away his life, you know, at trying to know everything, and even knowing everything doesn't seem to actually help with a human life. And what is the problem? Well, for Kierkegaard, the problem is knowing what I am to do. Knowing all this stuff doesn't actually help me know what I should do. It just tells me, okay, so this is the way things are, but so what should I do? And the gap that's there is one of angst for Kierkegaard. It's a difference than, say, fear. Fear is you're afraid of the dark, or you're afraid of the bear that you know is in the woods, or the moose that's in the hospital lobby. You know, if you all had fun watching that this week, you know, some moose just walked into the Providence Hospital library or hospital and just started eating one of the plants. I thought that was the funnest part. As I went over, here's this green, obviously, you know, slow growing, you know, kind of, and it ate it. I'm glad it was at least not plastic, but it was, if you watch that video, the moose started eating it and then went, bleh, bleh. It wasn't a very good plant to eat. It was green, but it turned out to be not very delicious.
Hospital food is bad.
There you go. We should have warned the moose.
I was going to say it's probably something from like tropical, because a lot of houseplants are tropical, so it's probably not like it could be toxic to beasts. So
it could be. Yeah, a lot of that stuff you don't want. Let's pick up.
Neurologists are shocked. They have found that tinnitus wipes your memory in less than 3 years. The earbuzz.
Is there a mood that expresses the human condition more than any other? For Soren Kierkegaard, that mood is indeed anxiety. And anxiety, otherwise known as angst or l'angoisse in French, is a cornerstone of existential philosophy because existential philosophers, starting with Kierkegaard, really think of it as indicative of the very human condition. Not exactly a cheery philosophy, as you may not be surprised to find out. In any case, or perhaps cheery, but in a surprising way, in a way that is recognizing the anguish or anxiety that is fundamentally characteristic of human existence. I'm Professor Ellie Anderson, a philosopher and co-host of Overthink podcast. I'm using today the Essential Kierkegaard, which is the text that I assign in my existentialism class. And if you notice any similarities, like maybe uncanny similarities, to Heidegger's view of anxiety, Sartre's view of anxiety, and Camus' notion of the absurd, that is because all of them were so deeply inspired by Kierkegaard, we could say that they cribbed him. For Kierkegaard, and specifically his pseudonym, Vigilius Halkiensis, because Kierkegaard writes in pseudonyms, he has these different characters who represent different stages on life's way or different spheres of existence. And the text, the concept of anxiety, which is a book where he develops this notion of anxiety, is written by the pseudonym called Vigilius Halkiensis. Anxiety begins with a recognition that there is nothing that anxiety is about. What distinguishes anxiety from fear for Halkiensis is that there is an aboutness to fear. There is an object of fear. But the same is not true of anxiety. I am actually not anxious about finishing my philosophy paper. I am anxious about nothing. And we'll say more about what that means momentarily. I'm going to switch to using the word Kierkegaard just for utility's sake. We could have conversations about what the author function involves in Kierkegaard's work, and I know some scholars of Kierkegaard are really careful about wanting to just talk about a particular pseudonym rather than Kierkegaard. Sorry if that is you, I am going to just use Kierkegaard here, but keep in mind to take that with a grain of salt because this is specifically his pseudonym, Vigilius Halkiensis, articulating that in this book. So, Kierkegaard describes anxiety starting with the idea that it's nothing. This common turn of phrase, he thinks, has a deeper philosophical resonance because he thinks that anxiety is nothing in a literal sense. When something feels out of joint, out of sorts, that is indicative of anxiety. And so anxiety isn't just a single feeling or a mood among others, it's actually what Heidegger will call in the following century a fundamental mood. For Kierkegaard, anxiety is this fundamental mood that, strictly speaking, is about nothing. Again, this is what distinguishes it from fear. And on page 153, Kierkegaard says that anxiety is freedom's possibility. When I think about possibilities, I'm usually thinking about a fixed set of possibilities. The possibility of going to the grocery store tonight, watching a TV show tonight, hanging out with a friend tonight. That is only part of the story of possibility, though. Even though it's our everyday notion of possibility, possibility truly understood, according to Kierkegaard, is on what we might call a meta level of possibility. The fact that it is possible for me to do anything at all, the fact that it is possible for me to choose between that delimited set of options, The fact that I am free with respect to them is, properly speaking, possibility. And anxiety emerges once I get the feeling of that possibility, the feeling of freedom. In a way, anxiety is the feeling of freedom, or we could say it's the beginning of the feeling of freedom. I'm going to look here at page 140, where Kierkegaard says, about 5 lines up from the bottom of the page, how does spirit relate itself to itself and to its conditionality? It relates itself as anxiety. So anxiety is the way that spirit relates itself to itself, and he contrasts this with the vegetative. So I began the video by saying that anxiety...
So you find her interesting? Her explanation makes sense? I asked that earlier because I was playing one of her other videos on Kierkegaard as I was waiting for folks to arrive. The language here of you as a self having your subjective side dialoguing with yourself, trying to figure out what you should do. Remember my favorite is the candy bar. Should I have the candy bar or not? Yes.
I think it sounds exactly like option paralysis.
Option, that's me in the supermarket looking, I just want spaghetti sauce. And I'm like, brands, do I want chunky tomato? Do I want basil, what, you know, the B one, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, and I blame this on Malcolm Gladwell, you know, this paralysis, exactly. You've got so many choices.
Just get them all.
You need a bigger house to even think about doing something like that. That's why it's much better being male when you're shopping. Because you can just call your wife and the wife tells you, this one. And then you don't have to figure out, you know, you just get the one that she wants. And then you so that, you know, much easier, right? And in fact, that's the best choice because getting what your wife wants is, I mean, the big picture is not what kind of spaghetti we're having tonight. The big picture is the wife keeping you allowed to keep coming to that house, right? You know, that's the big picture. So doing what the wife wants. I highly recommend to young men, get married as soon as you can find a woman who's pick a brilliant woman, that's the most important part, and do what she says, right? So that's, you know, if you want to live a long, happy, wealthy, you know, all those good things, you know, find the wife and do what she says, that, you know, forever. You know, that's the important part.
So I'll write this down. Be a woman.
Yeah.
Take notes.
Well, you know, believe it or not, I'm male. You know, that's my bias.
I'm sorry.
And so, yeah, thank you. And so, you know, I'm talking to those others who are brain damaged. You know, the males. You know, where the corpus callosum has split at 6 weeks in the womb, and it's going to be male, right? You know, and you know, but so this dialogue that goes on in your head. And remember, my argument, by the way, is that not everybody in the world has had this experience. You actually have to have language. So it limits it to at least dolphins and people and maybe elephants, right? That have enough language, that have a sense of identity. My name is, you know, if you're a dolphin, right? You know. And you're trying to decide what that identity means today. You know what shall I do today? Who am I? How do I maintain my place? Remember those 3 big questions that philosophy really is supposed to handle. Who am I? What's my place in the universe? And how do I maintain that place, right? So I'm trying to figure out all of those things. Not every human seems to have this issue because you have to have the program installed on your neck top that tells you you are a self. You know, it's a puzzle, because obviously if you're in the mirror and you get the mirror effect, it seems like any human, any chimpanzee, I mean there's a whole host of folks. Remember the parrot versus the parakeet in the mirror, right? You know, there's a difference, right? So you have to have the language, but also there's various programs that we install on your neck-top that run differently depending on the operating system, like maybe your language, and how you think of yourself. Clearly, the idea that you are an individual, you have responsibilities, and you have rights. Whoa, I have rights, yes. All my friends drive Porsches. I must make amends. Lord, won't you give me a Mercedes-Benz, right? No, I won't sing it. I know. That's one of my favorite songs, but no, I won't try to sing it. Even though the singer that sang it and made it famous had a voice worse than mine, which is okay. It was still neat, right? Okay, but so you get the idea, right? Maybe that not every society has developed to the point where an individual has this program that enables them to feel angst about what they should do, right? And by the way, that program might not necessarily be a good one for you to have, because